but I remember I'd see channels that had like 2,000 subscribers. And like, to me, that was like unimaginably huge. And I think around the time that I started, I think Colville was like running around like 120. And that was like just so huge. I couldn't fathom it. Then before you even get to like the bigger ones that are like, 500,000 plus. So yeah, you always kind of think like, oh, one day I'll get there. And then you're watching your number of subscribers, go up by one a day, or have days where it ultimately went down by one because there's just no traffic and you're making all this stuff and no one's watching it. When I won the Innie Award, I was shocked.
Hi, welcome to the Daiku Podcast. I'm Gary Snow. As one of the most popular YouTubers in tabletop RPGs, Seth Skorkowsky shares GM and player advice while passing along his knowledge about games like Call of Cthulhu, Traveller, and D&D, all while entertaining us with his many characters. Seth is also an Emmy Award winner for his channel, an accomplished writer in science fiction and fantasy genre, as well as the co-host of Modern Mythos podcast. Seth, welcome.
Hi, how you doing today?
I want to hear hello, Internet.
Hello, Internet.
Well, I always know I'm in for a good ride when I hear that at the start of a video. I'm a huge fan of your channel, especially I have to say right off the bat, the positivity that you bring from your channel, I just love. And you just like, there's a lot of channels out there that preach some negativity, and you just always bring the positive.
Well, I think with every creator, okay, most creators, definitely me, is it takes a while for you to find your voice. So a lot more of, I guess, my early stuff, like my first year, that I like to like pretend didn't happen. Like, yeah, I've been slowly replacing videos, actually working on like a redo of an old video now. Had a lot more kind of, I guess, in your faceness to it. And I was like, that's not me. And I kind of did away with it. I don't want to be the channel that people go to get angry. I feel that there's kind of like enough of that. I'd rather people like, laugh and enjoy it, and maybe think of, cool ideas or anything that either I said or, maybe what I said inspired them to come up with a better idea or whatever. But I would rather be entertaining and helpful than like just, I guess, rage bait or anything. That's probably why I don't get involved in any of the like stuff that happened with the OGL and all that stuff. It's like, yes, I have opinions, but there's 99 other channels that are ranting and raving about it, and most of them know more about that situation than me. So let me put on a fake mustache and tell you a joke. So,
well, I couldn't agree more. I tried to model myself after that same mantra, so I can appreciate
my style.
It's too late. It's already done.
Damn.
So before we get into the channel and your writing, which we're going to talk about all the good stuff that you've been doing, just tell us, how did you get involved with this crazy little hobby? What's your origin story?
Well, I guess it's not too exciting. I always loved sci-fi and fantasy. I grew up watching, all the cool cartoons of the early 80s, like Thundar the Barbarian and, He-Man, and it was during the Star Wars craze and all that. So I always loved genre fiction and whatnot. But I also grew up in the South, in the southern United States. It's known as the Bible Belt. So when the Satanic Panic hit in the 80s, we were like ground zero, man. And I was aware of Dungeons and Dragons because it was the game that drove you insane and made you murder your family. And I thought that it was illegal. Like, I thought they had outlawed it. And which, of course, being a youngin', meant that I really wanted to check out what the hell all the everything was about there. Because all I really knew about D&D was this cartoon that was like, I don't know, it was like a carnival ride. I don't know what that was.
Magical carnival ride. Yeah, I wished for that. I was like, yeah.
I was like, oh, so D&D is a roller coaster, and roller coasters scare the hell out of me. So I was like, I don't know if I want to try this, but I'm willing to take the risk if it takes me off to a fantasy land. And then when I was 13, um, or I guess just before I was 13, our school homeroom are those little magazines that have like, just a bunch of crap to sell kids that, you know, whatever. And there was an ad for, I guess, the black box edition of D&D and a big banner across the top. It's back. And so like, I thought they had like it was no longer illegal. So I was like so excited. And, so I got it for my 13th birthday, had a little adventure that you could kind of like GM yourself and some friends through. And that led me to finding a friend whose dad had been, dungeon mastering since the 70s. So we joined his group. He was like, I'm not going to this brand new second edition thing. We play first edition. So we got all used books and played first edition. It kind of just went from there.
And so you played throughout, I guess. Did you have a gap like many people do? Like, they start to get adult responsibilities and they can't play past their teens, or like, they go to university. But some people find games and other players in university as well.
Oh, my only gap was my senior year of high school. And that was because I discovered girls and punk rock music. And I was just so busy partying and having a good time that we just never really worked it in. But by my freshman year of college, it was we had all gotten back into gaming. I found a group of people. I found some girls that gamed, and we went right back to it. So it was before the adult responsibilities is when I had my gap, and I was like, man, I really want to get back to this. So when I went off to college, I still play with when I moved away when I was 20 and I transferred to university. The group that I formed, I still play with 3 of the people that were in that original game from our college game. So there's like 4 of us, 3 plus me, out of the 7 that were originally there. So we just kept going through our 20s, 30s, and our 40s, and just.
Well, that's great. Not everybody can do that, and you're all in the same community.
Yeah, I mean, there we now have like hour commutes between us, so it's not like we're all living in the same tiny little college town anymore. Because there's jobs and careers and families and all that stuff kicked in. But once a month is when we actually schedule a whole day, and we're gonna game. We're gonna get together and be a bunch of dorks. So it's like a get together at noon, and then we end at 10 to midnight ish. But there's like a dinner, and then the first hour is just BSing. So people are like, my God, it's that long. It's like, it also includes the fact we're a bunch of old friends who occasionally stop like in the middle. It's like, let me, I forgot to tell you guys about my kid, and talk about stuff. So I always say it's like 8-hour games, but they're more in line with 10 to 12-hour sessions with a lot of interruptions.
And I can't help but notice your channel. One of the other things I really appreciate about your channel is it's not just D&D. Obviously, there's an element to it, but like you Call of Cthulhu and Cyberpunk and Cult Divinity and Traveler. Did you play all those games, or was it primarily D&D?
So until I guess my early 20s, I was one of those super D&D fanboys. If it's not D&D, it's a cheap knockoff sort of thing. The really insufferable ones, yeah, I was their king. And so I didn't want to look at anything that wasn't D&D or didn't have like TSR's name on it. And then I guess the gap was sci-fi, because there was my friend's dad had an old copy of Star Frontiers. I didn't have access to it unless I was like over at his house. So through that, I kind of discovered MechWarrior, and then we found Cyberpunk. And Cyberpunk ended up kind of being my gateway out of D&D, discovering that I preferred skill-based games. And I guess about 2008, I hit full D&D burnout. Like I was just done. I was frustrated with a lot of little things about it, and we flipped to Cyberpunk as our main game. And all of us, we played side games for years, but all of us ended up really preferring the skill-based mechanics, and we stuck with that. I guess till about 2014 when 5e D&D came out, and I got talked into running a 5e game. We played it for a year, and at the end of that year, we were like, well, not our thing. And then we dove straight into Call of Cthulhu because 7th edition had just released. And at that point, we had done enough game changes that switching systems suddenly started becoming really easy for us. So yeah, all the games that I review, I play. I have a personal policy. I'm not going to review it unless I've personally played or run it, because I'm a professor, a forever GM. I'm usually the one running it, but I've encountered so many reviews where it was very clear the reviewer has never played this game, and I've seen some very impassioned reviews slamming something that I like, and it was extremely obvious they had never played it. They just kind of skimmed through it and passed judgment and were wrong. So I was like, I am not going to be that guy. So I kind of have my policy of I have to play it in order to review it, because I think most of the gems, and the flaws really manifest when you play it versus you're sitting on your couch reading it. Like there's a lot of stuff that when you're reading it, it's like, this looks a little off. And then it plays beautifully. And there's a lot of stuff that reads great. And then when you're trying to do it in a game, you discover 1,000 problems that you just you didn't anticipate when you were reading it because you hadn't actually seen it in action. So that's really what my reviews really often try to focus on is like, hey, I was able to prepare this much, but once we started playing, this jumped out at me and I had to quickly improvise. So heads up, this is how I dealt with it, but just be warned. There's not really a connection between these 2 points on this adventure, and just kind of assumes they're going to go from here to here when my players didn't just go from there to there. I had to give them a reason. So here's some tips on how to do it.
Well, things always play different at the table, and you never really know until you kind of get it there. But talking about your channel, I know like when I look back, I couldn't help. I went back through your catalog and your history. And so I think that your very first video, you were reading from your story, Mist of Lichthafen, 8 years ago. And then there's a we'll talk about your writing, but then there was a 2-year gap. And then you came back.
So so my very first short story sale was a story called The Mist of Lichthafen, and it got its little long list nomination. It was a really great. It was actually a fantastic first sale, and I was asked to read for this little podcast at the time called Transmissions from Beyond. That was the podcast for Black Static Magazine. Great title, by the way. I love that podcast name. And so I read it, and I had like the worst microphone in the world. I'd like whatever desktop little cheesy microphone it was. It wasn't really bad.
8 years ago, there was not good microphones to be found, really.
Not for less than $1 million, and there was no like a million channels telling you how to hook it up. So it's just kind of like you're on your own. And so I read this for this podcast, and I always liked it. Well, then the podcast, they ended up going away, and I was like, I'm just going to put this on my YouTube channel as a way to kind of promote my writing because that was my main focus. And then when my first novel came out in 2014, I was talking with a friend of mine who's really into like big marketing stuff, and he's like, you need to get a YouTube channel because it's the second largest search engine. And I was like, I don't know what to make a channel about. It's like, well, make it about writing. It's like, I've written one book, and Brandon Sanderson has a channel, and there is no way on earth I could possibly talk with any more authority than the machine who pumps out like 9 books in the course of this podcast so far. And so I just kind of sat on it for 2 years until I came up with the idea of making a channel about gaming, because that was my other biggest, passion. And the channel kept the name Seth Skorkowsky because it was meant to support the writing. And if I had a cool name that wasn't mine, then people wouldn't be able to associate it with the author as much, I thought. And so that's why I don't have like a really sweet channel name, just my giant unpronounceable last name. And then it ended up that the channel kind of ended up cresting past my popularity as an author. So I'm now like, instead of being an author that is a YouTube channel, more of a YouTuber that's also an author.
Well, I can pronounce your name just fine. I have Ukrainian heritage in my family, so I'm like I hope I did a good job at least. But
I've had some polls tell me that I pronounced my name wrong, which is like, oh, my great grandfather pronounced it this way, so it goes back a while. But because I think it should be Skorkowsky, which I think is, I don't know, it's pretty cool. But I grew up in the South calling it Skorkowski my whole life, so I can't really. I can't call it by its proper pronunciation without it sounding really fake and forced. So I just go by how we've always done it.
Well, it's your name. You can pronounce it how you want, right?
Dang right.
And then going, back into your like history of it, it took like, just I couldn't help but notice like, probably 6 videos in before Jack the NPC made his first appearance. Was that like, what made you kind of go, I want to do this? Like, because it's a little bit of a departure from just like talking about games and reviewing games and adding a bit of flair to it.
Well, so it is probably actually more than that because I've taken some of those earliest videos have been slowly going away and replaced. Like right now, like once I'm done, I'm going to go back and I'm going to keep working on Blackwater Creek, which was one of my very first Call of Cthulhu videos and predates Jack as well.
Yeah.
So eventually it will kind of vanish into the archives and there'll be a new one that's got Jack and proper audio. So, yeah, my first review was Cyberpunk 2020. It's terrible. And I had a few like scenarios I wanted to start reviewing. So I had like, some D&D and I always wanted to diversify. I didn't want to focus too much on any one system. So I always kind of had a rule of like, I don't want to talk about the same game 2 videos in a row. Like, so I try to space them out. And I had an idea for a video that I was going to do in the far future that was about a post-apocalyptic Cthulhu setting, which has been done years ago. It's a terrible video. But, and I needed a green screen to do this gag because I wanted to like have halfway through, there was like an explosion and then it's me, but in like my post-apocalyptic gear, because I actually used to be really into post-apocalyptic cosplay. And I was like, well, I need to get a green screen. And it's December. So there's like 1 billion Amazon sales. So I like go on to get a green screen. I end up getting a green screen that because I kept upgrading it for $1. So it's like big enough to sail a ship by. It is so oversized, ridiculously huge, but it cost me like $20. Well, at the time, my channel, because it could monetize instantly, was making 2 to 3 cents a day. I did the math. I was like, it's going to take me like 6 years to pay off this $20 green screen. I need to use it more than once. So I was going to do a review of The Haunting for Call of Cthulhu, and I decided to talk about this NPC that I had used to help walk my players through the process of investigative games because they were used to D&D and they're used to Cyberpunk, where it's like, okay, here's the job, let's go in guns blazing, leave no survivors, get the gold, get out. And this was more of a, I'll go to the library first and research it, and, kind of check out the stuff and actually kind of circle around the house getting all the stuff before you go inside. And that's how investigation games work. And so I had an NPC to kind of help teach them the ropes the first few games. So I want to do that. So I put on a suit and a fedora, and I stuck like a crappy kind of background to like a library. And I went ahead and made this character that was kind of like the original NPC. And it had a really, are you familiar with the Venture Brothers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The voice was originally modeled after Dr. Girlfriend. So it was very, very harsh, and I can only do this for about like 30 seconds at a time. So as Jack kind of grew, because I liked it and it was funny, and I was like, okay, I'm going to do that again. And I would give him longer and longer monologues. If you go back and watch the early videos, his voice actually slowly lowered into one that I could maintain for, a 2-minute monologue without hacking. So it basically came out of necessity at first. And then, because then I did a few videos without him. And then I kind of went back. I was like, I really liked having that sidekick that I could like just talk to and kind of break up the monotony of staring at my face. So, now you can stare at my face in the sepia tone. And it just kind of happened. There wasn't a plan. I tried it as an experiment. I liked it and kept it.
And then as you went on, you started throwing in other characters. And do you have, or how did that evolve? Like, did you go, okay, I need one for like Cthulhu, I need one for Cyberpunk, I need one for Traveler, and you started just like adding to the mix?
Yeah, I mean, because like at first it was like, Call of Cthulhu. I wanted to make it look like he was in the 1920s, so I put on a suit and a fedora, and then the original NPC was this like alcoholic, so I gave him a flask, and then when I did my post-apocalyptic one, I stuck him in that, and then I grew up doing a lot of Renaissance fairs, so when I did like D&D, it's like, oh yeah, I got that costuming out the butt, so yeah, I threw on some of my old Ren Fair garb, and as we started playing other games, I was like, well, I'm committed now, so I've got to find more costumes for him. And my wife and I have always done tons of costume parties and costume events and whatnot. So we actually have a ridiculously huge costume closet. And then I had to start adding kind of more and more to it, depending on what it is. So like when we did Traveler and sci-fi, I was like, I'm going to pick up a cheap jumpsuit and sew some patches on it. And I'm going to get a 1980s Photon helmet, which is an old laser tag game. And I'm just going to paint it up and wear that. And I mean, it's like, these aren't really high quality costumes. And but you film it with a neat background, throw on a sepia or black and white filter, which hides a lot of the cheapness to it, and talk in a cartoony voice, and people don't notice. And then over the years, I've learned how to add effects and whatnot. So now he can shoot laser guns, and when he's standing at the front of a ship, you can see the star fields moving through the window behind him, and that sort of thing. But it just uh, kind of got more and more elaborate as I got more proficient with it. And I also just get a kick out of it. I'll be honest.
Well, I can imagine like there is probably a little bit of a learning curve. Like I do video editing, just like in my day job, in my profession a little bit, and I can see like the work that you put into it, because I can guess like the green screen and like the backgrounds and all that kind of stuff. Do you do all the video editing yourself? Like how is that learning process as far as getting to that point where you're comfortable and doing it every day?
Well, yeah, I do everything myself. I'm an absolute one man show. So from the writing, my videos are also very image heavy, because once again, I just find it kind of boring just to keep looking at my face. So if I'm talking about adventure stuff, I will flash up the art. If I'm talking about a certain line of text, I will flash up the excerpts of what I'm talking about and highlight it. And I do all this in Photoshop. So you have to. I basically make my background template and I put it up there, and add like shadow effects and all that stuff. So the pre-work, like before I record, I make all that stuff, and that can take several days. And actually, the recording and the editing are the final steps. Like everything else, I've been working on for almost a week. So the average video takes a week to do, and it doesn't look like it. And part of it's because I am so novice. I'm completely self-taught on Photoshop. Like occasionally I'll like find a YouTube video and somebody tells me how to do something that I either don't know how to do, or will tell me that there is a vastly superior and faster way of doing the thing that I have been doing the long and hard way for years, because I just, somebody gave me a copy of Photoshop years ago, and I've just kind of fumbled my way through it to I wouldn't say proficiency, but the illusion of proficiency. So, and that's also been a pretty steep learning curve as I've gotten better and better and kind of developed my style. Because all of my videos, like the background image on slides, I usually try to reflect the game. So, like if I'm playing Traveler, all the backgrounds on all the Traveler image slides are these specific ones. And then when I was doing like Octung Cthulhu, with that one, the backgrounds for game master and player sections are different colors, because that's how it appears in their books, where one is blue, the other is green, and stuff like that. So I actually put a lot of effort into something that I know no one has ever noticed. But I think it kind of adds that little fit and finish where they might not consciously notice, but they do kind of see it's a little bit more polished than I guess the average one. But I don't know how to animate. So if it looks like it's animated, that's actually probably a bunch of stills that I made on Photoshop, and I'm just flashing through them very quickly. Or it's creative use of wipes to give an illusion of movement, because I can't animate. I've tried. really terrible.
Well, I think it works really well, whatever you're doing. And part of the appeal is your years of experience that you bring into the game. And like you mentioned, like it's the games that you've played and stuff that you've learned while playing those games. And I think one of the, like for me, one of the most popular parts of it is that RPG philosophy series where you talk about like all those GM tips and player tips as well, but primarily GM tips where you go, this is how you can get over these common hurdles that you might not even know existed, that they were a hurdle to begin with. But here's some tips to go through that. Do you have a lot of feedback on those versus maybe some of the reviews? Like what's the more popular channels or not channels, but episodes or videos?
The most popular ones are always list vids. I always feel kind of dirty making those because I did a lot of them at the beginning, and then it kind of became apparent when you're trying to do a list video that's like, the 5 worst or the 5 best, blah blah blahs. You've got like 10, maybe 15 minutes, and you don't have enough time to actually delve into them. It's kind of like a surface kind of skipping off them. So like you aren't really giving them justice. So that's why those have like all but stopped on the channel. Like I think I did one like a year ago. It's usually ones where I've gone through. It's like I can talk about this entire topic in a 3-minute span and then get on to the next. Well, then I started doing a kind of much longer dedicated videos over certain issues. And then a lot of that had to do with feedback. When you are only spending about 3 minutes on a subject and you're trying to work in a funny skit and that sort of thing, I get a lot of people who's like, well, actually, the root of it is this and blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, I should probably actually cover all that. And that's how it ends up being, instead of a 3-minute sketch, a 20 to 30-minute dedicated video where I try to like cover that one specific thing, as well as like, hey, this is a thing that drives everybody crazy, and here's why it might be happening, and here's things you can do to improve it, and blah blah blah. So that a lot of that came from feedback and a lot of hate. I got a lot of hate in that first year, like to the point I nearly quit multiple times.
Really?
So oh yeah, and so the philosophy series has kind of grown from just being silly list videos to trying to be helpful. And its very first one, the very actual first video for the channel, was the RPG social contract that I kind of consider the foundation for my entire philosophy series of like, like start here and everything else is taking this into account. And, sometimes somebody will come along and it's clear might be their first video they've seen. And they'll try to lecture me on like what a social contract is. Like, dude, I got that covered. I did it and it was terrible. Then I redid it because I've redone most of my early vids. So, and most, I think, game issues really come down to, I could almost summarize all of them up with communication. Mm-hmm. A lot of them are very elaborate ways of just coming back down to try to communicate.
Yeah, that is a key one. And it's funny that you mentioned that. In particular, there's that one, I don't know if it was recent, but it was like, just say what you want. And it's like, I went, boy, like that summarizes so many problems, like across every game.
What's crazy is I actually almost want to make a sequel to that one, because it wasn't that long after that, or I guess that long ago. I guess I made that one like a year or so ago. I had one of those issues at my table, and it was the most maddening thing, because it was actually one of our newer players who was trying to enact a plan, but wasn't saying why he was doing it. It looked random. Like, if it wasn't for the fact he was a good friend of mine and I know him very well, I would have just assumed he was attempting to burn the game down. And I always said that. It's like, dude, if I didn't know you, why are you doing this thing? It makes no sense. And he couldn't explain what the goal was. It just looked like he was being crazy. And then my player, who's actually the worst about it, talked to me after the game. He's like, it was the weirdest case of outside looking in. I now understand what you've been griping about all these years, because I was completely baffled that entire time. I'm like, why are we doing this? And so the player wouldn't say what it was. And everybody's kind of getting defensive because it looked almost like some sort of passive aggressive act, but also the effect that he was wanting it to have since none of us knew what it was, and he was trying to hold on to it, required that the bad guys in the game reacted in certain ways. But if he doesn't tell me what they are, I'm going to go with what my gut tells me. And if he told me what he was kind of going for, I could almost guarantee that's the direction they're going to go. But if it's like they're going to be very hostile about it, and he's like, well, that wasn't my intention. Like, I am having trouble imagining what other result it could be. So if he had just kind of talked, we could have figured out to either A, how he could have approached it different to get the end result, or what I'm looking at a field of possible options. If I know the one he's going for, I might try to lean that direction to give him what he wants rather than me just kind of shooting in the dark. And there's also that defensive reaction that's down of, are you trying to sabotage the game? Because everyone around the table had it of like, dude, what are you doing? And it's because he just wouldn't say what he wanted. And it's no malice. He just thought it was obvious, and he just failed to tell us why. So like, I'm trying to figure out, like, how do I do a second video about this exact same topic that I talked about, just from the different angle of like, come on, guys, please. My own players don't even watch my videos, I guess.
And I can't help it. I want to delve into like you now. I think you have 112,000 followers on YouTube, and I remember you getting your 100,000 award. I saw it in your background. I think it's still there, right behind over your shoulder.
Yes, right behind me.
And when you got an Emmy award in 2019 for your channel. And did you ever expect this kind of level of success when you look back, like, when you kind of really started getting into it, like, 6-ish years ago? Did you ever anticipate anything like this?
Well, yeah, I think everybody always hopes and imagines, but realistically, no. I remember when I first started, there was like a couple channels. This is the other thing. I really didn't actually watch YouTube RPG videos before I started. And I think that's also really obvious with my early stuff, but also why I guess my channel evolved very different in style than a lot of them, is because I wasn't modeling it after anybody. I just was kind of shooting from the hip, and some of it worked, some of it didn't. But I remember I'd see channels that had like 2,000 subscribers. And like, to me, that was like unimaginably huge. And I think around the time that I started, I think Colville was like running around like 120. And that was like just so huge. I couldn't fathom it. Then before you even get to like the bigger ones that are like, 500,000 plus. So yeah, you always kind of think like, oh, one day I'll get there. And then you're watching your number of subscribers, go up by one a day, or have days where it ultimately went down by one because there's just no traffic and you're making all this stuff and no one's watching it. When I won the Annie Award, I was shocked. I did not expect to win it. I was kind of like that scene from Galaxy Quest of, I'm just jazzed about being on the show. Like, I was amazed I was nominated. And when they called my name, I literally had like nothing really prepared, because and then there was the shock of like, at best I thought I'd get second, and they called second first, and that was the Alexandrian. And I think Jason Alexander is just brilliant. So it was like, well, there's no way I could beat this guy. And then I won. And so I had the most stammering, awkward speech, because it was like, maybe I stroked out and I'm just dying on the table right now, and this is like my death fantasy or something. I don't know what's going on. So that was a big surprise, and especially considering just the amount of weird, venomous RPG fanboy hate that I had gotten in my first year, which I'll never stress enough was horrible. And then that led to me getting a couple gigs, writing gigs. So then I got an Annie Award, which I have trouble saying that I got it. It was the book that I did. That was a collection of RPG scenarios, won an Annie Award. So I got that one, but that wasn't because I did as much as my contribution to it wasn't so bad that it hurt everyone else's surefire win. It's kind of like, it's the group project, but I didn't drag them down.
Well,
versus I did it.
you're being humble about your skills and talents in the space. But maybe just going back to the fanboy hate and that kind of stuff, like it's kind of shocking because like I could just not even imagine somebody going that they hate your content. But what do you think that stems from? Like, I mean, I know there is that out there for whatever IPs and all that kind of stuff that happens, but like, do you know? Do you have a hunch as to the root of it in the hobby, at least?
Oh, I've got a few. There is no hobby that does not have toxic fandom. I don't care if it's RPGs or knitting or golf or whatever. Every hobby has toxic fans, and the internet has a tendency to bring out the worst of those people. So I don't think RPGs necessarily have any sort of like exclusive rights to that. It's just the nature of people and hobbies. There was a couple reasons. One, and like I said, in my first year, I had much more of a kind of an in-your-face sort of approach, and that wasn't working for me, and it wasn't working for them. And then, like I mentioned before, I wasn't fully explaining. Like, for example, I did a video once talking about characters who do not fit whatever the agreed theme was, and how that just ruins theme games. And but in it, I never explained what a theme game was. Now, it took me years of playing before we had our first theme game. Where like we were all traveling musicians, or we were all pirates or street gang of kids or whatnot. Before then, it was always like, okay, whatever out of the book, we'll make it work. And before we actually got into like, what if we are all, dwarves that worship this one god and are from this little temple town, and then we're going to adventure with like kind of this unified theme. I never explained it because I kind of like, I don't know, assumed that because I knew it, everybody else did, which is really stupid to do. So I would get a lot of people who completely would misunderstand what I was saying because I had given zero context to where it was coming from. So that was a very big part of it. And then also, I think the nature of YouTube, or at least the internet or whatnot, is I got significantly more when my channel was smaller than when I was larger, which doesn't make sense. I get far more people, I get far more traffic than I did then. But I would get, I don't know, 8, 9 hate messages a night when I had less than 2,000 subscribers.
Oh,
And far more than I get now. And now I'm 100 times bigger than that. And I think it's because when you do come across kind of like that toxic bullying type, they would rather pick on a small channel that no one's going to be there to defend them, versus if it's one of if someone jumps on mine now, there is enough regular traffic on there that they will get shot down by people that are saying like, dude, you're being a dick, or dude, you're wrong, or whatever.
yeah.
So I think there is that we're going to beat up the little guy because there's no one that's going to stop us. So I really did see a dramatic decline as my channel went up of that venom. And part of it could be because my quality got better and I learned how to approach stuff better. But it was so dramatic that I think a significant amount has to do with bullies go for the smaller dogs. And that's just the nature of those types of people.
Well, sorry that you went through that, and I am a humble little channel myself, but my problem is you just get ignored.
Yeah,
So
there's
that's the
there's
other
that.
problem.
And then you see, mine was like I got ignored for like the first like 9 months, and then my channel like blew up, and it was like, people finally noticed me, and they hate me. It's like careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
So, and I think with any creative process, whether it be writing or filmmaking or whatever, there is a lot of putting yourself out there, and people are very sensitive to that sort of feedback and criticism. You remember one negative comment far longer than you remember 50 positive ones, and that's just human nature. And so it can wear on you. I sometimes really wonder how some of the creators like Ginny D could possibly do it, because
Mhm.
I know that she gets it worse than I can fathom. So it's like, man, yeah, some people out there have some seriously thick skins, or have a
Yeah.
very close support group.
Well, it takes a lot to put yourself out there, whether it's like on your own YouTube channel or designing a game, or in your case, also writing stories and novels. And like it takes a certain amount of like, you hit publish or you hit, you know, upload, and you kind of like white knuckle it for a little bit, but you probably have gotten used to it over a while. But how did you first get into writing? Like when did you actually go, I'm going to write something?
I enjoyed writing. I enjoyed creative writing all throughout school. And then about the time I hit high school, I got really involved in debate, and I got talked into I should like go into broadcasting because I have a good announcer voice. So I kind of put aside my writing stuff, and I went to college, got a radio, TV, film degree, which I then never used. And but when I graduated and I moved away, and I didn't have like all my friends just right there, and I was working like my first corporate job, I started writing seriously as kind of my side thing. And I had a few short story sales. I've got two novels in a trunk that no one's ever going to see because they're terrible. So it took me 10 years before I wrote a publishable book and sold it. So it was kind of a very passionate hobby of mine. So I had like several little ones before then, and that was a very big uh, part of my creativity outlet, was writing these stories and whatnot. And it's kind of like a lot of the YouTube channel is, where it's a lot of uh, alone time, because writing a book is a very lonely thing. Even when you are doing uh, peer reviews and you get your beta readers and all that, the actual process of making the sausage is alone. And that's kind of when I get most creative. So they actually have a lot of similarities, despite the fact they are absolutely different in just about every way, as far as the kind of the solitary creative process.
You mentioned like the novels in the trunk. I think you had a blog post called "Novel in the Drawer." I assume that's kind of what you meant by that. Can you just tell that story? Because I think it's a really good story, that like your time in Austin at that writers conference.
Yeah, I did what many gamers did. I was going to write the next best great fantasy novel that was using a lot of elements from a game. All the stuff that actually they tell you never to do. There's a reason. And I basically learned how to write through that because I got very involved in workshops. And my first book, which of course is going to be the beginning of a series, took 24 months to write. And then I started working on the second one while I was trying to pitch or query the first novel out to an agents and whatnot. And that is a nightmare hell itself. You have to summarize the entire book in about 3 sentences, and then put yourself out there and try to get an agent to even respond, let alone accept you. And that pretty much went nowhere. And I'd gotten kind of dismayed. And around the time I think the second book was about 75% done, I got guilted by a friend of mine who was involved in a convention to go to this writing workshop, and where we were going to sit down with an editor who was like a big editor, and we were going to spend basically 3 days. And it was going to be 20 of us, and we're all going to read like the first 10 pages of each other's novels. And he was going to critique it, but because we'd all read each other's work, we could apply what he was saying. We could learn from it. So the gentleman's name was Lou Anders. He had actually just won the Hugo for Best Editor the month before. So it's pretty much as rock star hot editor as it gets, is that right there. So I spent 3 days locked in a room with Lou and 19 other people. And at the end of it, his response was pretty much, this book taught you how to write. Embrace it. It's unpublishable crap. go write a good book now. And that might sound like that would be the most crushing thing in the world, but it wasn't. It was like he had voiced what I kind of knew. And because I had spent this much time with him explaining how to get a book to hook you in the first page and how important the first 10 pages are and all that, we've done this process 20 times. I had some ideas for another book I wanted to do. Like the next one, it was just going to involve these like monster hunters and this like demon possessed, gun and all this crazy stuff. And so the next week I started writing that, and that was my novel Dameron. And the first chapter, at least the initially, was exactly 10 pages long, because that is what Lou taught us to do. It was like, I hit every single point. So basically I left there kind of relieved, and I just put aside this book that I had written, and because I knew it was bad, but I knew why. And I knew how to approach it better. But I'd also learned how to write an active voice, and I learned how to do all the technical aspects, because any form of art has an incredible amount of technical aspects to it. Whether it be sculpting or writing or whatnot, there is just a massive technical know-how you need. I'd learned all that, and it was time to actually make something good. So,
well, they say every craft takes 10,000 hours to become an expert in, and it's no different than like a role-playing game. Like, I mean, how many times people always say like, well, yeah, just write that first role-playing game and then just get it out of the way, because whatever you think is going to be the next D&D killer is not. Just get it over and done with and put it away.
Man, I've got like 9 responses to that. One, the first time I ever heard that 10,000 hours thing was from Lou Andrews that weekend. Okay. So every time I hear it, I think of that. One of my joys is I like going through books on the history of tabletop gaming. Big Rigs, Ben Riggs is Slaying the Dragon, and I actually just finished Shannon Appleklein's Designers and Dragons #4 over the 20 teens, and in it he talked about fantasy heartbreakers, and I don't think I'd ever heard that term, or at least if I had, I never really knew what it meant, which was all of those games that people made that were supposed to dethrone D&D that were just crap, just heartbreaking, wastes of effort and potential. So you said that's like, oh yeah, the fantasy heartbreakers. And I think especially with old editions, like with AD&D first and then second to a big extent, there was kind of an assumption that you the GM had to fix the game. Like, it actually wasn't 100% playable, and you had to house roll. And so every group had a different type of D&D that they played, and so the dungeon master or game master or whatever game it was had to patch a lot. So like it kind of came with game designer built into the job. And one of the things I think a lot of old school gamers just have is that, well, you just assume you're going to pick it up and you're going to have to fix it, because you always have to fix it. It's like you get 90% of a game here. And then with the evolution of games, designs have gotten so much better. So many ideas have entered the marketplace. We have experience of what actually works versus what sounds like it might work, but really kind of sucks. New games, you don't have to do that. Where if you house rule, it's because you want to make a good thing better. But there wasn't I have to house rule this to make it remotely playable is gone. And I think that standards have actually really, really gone up in that regard. As far as when I do go back and I read a lot of old games or adventures from like the 70s and 80s, it is a lot more of like, wow, I used to think this was good, and this is really, really rough compared to the stuff that's come out in the 25 plus years since then. So I think when people say I'm going to write that next new fantasy game, it's one of those like, whoa, man, competition has gotten really good, because the entire design of gaming has just gotten so good over 40 years.
Yeah, and I've run across it in my travels, like through this podcast and just like in my gaming life, people that everybody's a bit of a closet designer, and
Oh
I've
yeah.
had people think like they go, I've got this game I've been working on for 6 years, and I just cringe because I do think it's going to be one of those fantasy heartbreakers that is coming, but the intent and the joy of doing it is often something to behold too. Like, if you enjoy doing something, there's no reason to stop from doing it. But it does concern me often when I hear some of these stories.
Well, a lot of it's like I talked about with writing. Sometimes just it's a fun little creative thing that you can do, like whether it's designing your games or whatnot. That itself is a hobby. It's kind of like they talk about like collecting game books and playing RPGs are two separate hobbies. And it's
Mhm.
like, oh crap, guilty. So I feel that there is a bit of a game designer in in GMs. And once upon a time, that was out of necessity than it was out of just sheer joy of it. And one of I remember as a couple of years ago, I saw some hot take tweet that really like got under my skin because it was someone saying how when somebody's complaining about D&D or whatnot, it's usually D&D because it's the biggest dog in the room, and saying like like don't try to fix it. You're probably playing the wrong game. You should look into other games. And it was somebody scolding that opinion, saying it was uh, basically you're squashing budding designers. You shouldn't tell them that they should play a different game. They should just fix their game. And you see some positive feedback. And my first thought was, if all you've ever played is one game and you're going to try to design a game, you are seriously undereducated for what is out there, because I think once you actually start playing a variety of games, you see how different they are. And I think people who've only played one have no idea how different games will approach some of the same issues. That that is really where I think the creativity blossoms from. Just because you have so many more options of like, oh, I like this aspect of this game, and I like this aspect of this game. Let's see if I can kind of work them together and get the best out of both, and
Mhm.
get rid of like all their strengths, none of their weaknesses. And we're going to make Blade here.
Yeah.
And when you do look at stuff like where like fifth edition D&D is, and it's got like the bonus and penalty dice, like, well, where'd that come from? Well, I'm pretty sure it was Robin Laws did that in a game in the 90s. Like those are old concepts from like from the indie games and all of that. And a lot of those names that a lot of people never heard, they're the ones that came up with those really innovative ideas that the larger games 15 years later adopted. Well, that's because those people either had enough credentials because they'd written enough small indie games or small press games that they then got the job for the major publication, or the designers of those larger publications read what else is out there, and they learn, oh, that's a cool idea. How can I work that into to my project? Versus if all you ever know is one game, you're not going to design uh, the next big thing if you have no idea what else is out there.
Yeah.
And when you do look at the resumes of some of those designers, they go back decades before they ever started working on this particular game that you're playing now. And it's like, that's how game design works, is just get out in that marketplace of ideas, and sometimes throw ideas against the wall. Some of them suck, but you also get to find out that there's some really cool ones.
Yeah.
And they might not work in the way they're implemented, but it's like you put that idea in your head. It's like, I can make that work, and I can improve on it and build on it. And that's part of why I think game design has just gotten so good, is there's been a billion ideas that have thrown out, and we've been able to kind of see which ones have risen to the top and incorporate them. And so it's kind of cool. But I think game designing now is like, oh, you got to read a lot more than you used to.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons why I started this channel, and if you go back to my catalog, I've got a bunch of videos, but probably like 40 or so interviews with like indie game designers. Like I think I have like maybe one that they did like a D&D-esque game, but for the most part, they're all indie games, all kind of unique. Some in the OSR, but they're not like 5e Dungeons and Dragons. And I love the passion that they bring to it and the creativity that they bring to it and the unique angle at it. Like sometimes like coming at it with a fresh eye, just like it's just so interesting and so creative, and it just makes you go, I want to play that. And so for me, I just love what indie designers bring to the game. And I assume a lot of the people that I've been interviewing, which are, small startup indie designers, will probably be, like you said, in 10 years, they're going to be designing the hits, or their game will grow to that, any of those. And I Shannon
I
Applecline
absolutely
is,
agree.
yeah.
Like, yes, keep going. Anyway, sorry to interrupt. Keep going.
No, I was just, and Shannon Applecline is a friend of the show. He's been on a number of times. I'll put links above for people to check out. And we do like a year in review, last couple of years of just talking about the industry in general. And I have to ask you, maybe going back to designing games, because I think you've designed a couple adventures for, if I'm not mistaken, in some settings.
I have, I've written adventures, but those are for like already published games. My design, when I danced with it, was when we were playing Cyberpunk 2020. The old interlock system was a product of its time. It was 1989, and as I said, older games, there kind of was an assumption you were going to have to house rule it to make it playable. And I, when we decided to make this our primary game, I got very involved in what's called the Interlock Unlimited community, which is like basically they got permission from Podsmith to just house rule the living hell out of that rule set and turn it into a system that could work with anything. So after a while, we stopped playing Cyberpunk, and I turned it into essentially Call of Cthulhu. It was a 1930s supernatural pulp investigative game. Where it was like I had taken like some Cthulhu adventures and some stuff here, and I had mashed them all together using Interlock Unlimited, which means I had to actually invent quite a bit. And then we did it with the fantasy setting, so it's like Cyberpunk, except we are, knights in shining armor, and we had to figure out magic rules and whatnot. And my respect for game designers skyrocketed through that, because there's a lot of jobs that you're like, oh yeah, that wouldn't be that hard, because you have no idea what it actually takes. And I was trying to do elaborate changes to an existing system that I knew like the back of my hand. And then I kind of thought about like, God, some of these guys build this stuff whole cloth, and like this is killing me. So I feel that I have massive respect for game designers, because my toe dip into game design versus just house rules and whatnot was enough to tell me that, like, whew, mad respect.
And you've never been tempted to kind of like, you see a lot of, I would say, popular YouTubers that are like, I could probably put out a Kickstarter and be quite successful if I design my own game or setting within a game system. Have you ever been tempted, or do you have that kind of in the future plans?
Not really. I have found a lot of games that I absolutely love, but for one, I don't believe it is remotely possible to have a universal engine, because there are so many different types of games that we like. There is no system that can actually do it all well. They might be able to do certain things really well, but they can't do everything. And so if I was going to design a game, it would be for a very specific purpose. And at the same time, I can look at stuff like BRP that was done, and it's like, oh god, I can't. It's kind of hard to beat that, and a lot of other stuff. It's like, or I could just take BRP and I could force it into whatever I want. Or I have no idea what the Traveler system name is. I don't know if that mechanic has a title, or I'm not remembering the second, the house system that Free League that uses for Alien and a lot of its games. Yeah. Yes, Year Zero. Yeah, that's Zero Dawn. I don't know. Anyway, so Year Zero, or there's like Modifius 2D20, which I'm not a fan of, but where it's like I can't come up with anything on those levels. And I could probably come up with like one of those little pamphlet games, the micro RPGs.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I'm not really I'm not really into micro RPGs. So no.
What about any of your like Black Raven setting and like putting that into a D&D world or anything like that? Chocolate peanut butter, put them together and.
Well, my Black Raven books actually were originally born out of a D&D world. So it was all in the same world that my novels were. It was like kind of the idea of it was a living world. So this is like a totally unrelated thing going on, was this other character. And that's what got published. While the actual main novel with the setting and all the world lore will never see the light of the day. But you do have these short stories that I think it's actually pretty clear when you're reading it that the world is realized. It's very well visualized, but it's only hinted at, like just enough to tell you that it's like, yeah, I know what this place looks like. I know how the politics here work, but it's not important for the story of a thief. Not really, and mostly because I don't like a lot of the IPs that get so narrowed down, or they kind of concern me, because I want a game that is specialized for what it's designed for, but at the same time isn't too limiting. For example, and I don't want to pick on them because I love it, but with Free League's Blade Runner, gorgeous. Oh my God. Everything Free League publishes, by the way, is like the most gorgeous RPG book ever to be published.
I'm jealous.
It's absolutely beautiful. We haven't run it yet. I've read it and I've prepped and everything from the start adventure. Everything looks clean, but it is perfect if you want to play a group of police living in Los Angeles who hunt replicants. That's it. That's all you can do with it. I actually was doing a panel with them at Origins with one of their guys. I was like, I want a supplement where you can be a group of replicants hiding from the cops. I want to know about this off-world stuff. But the game is so focused on one specific thing. It was my same feeling towards Aliens. Aliens, if you want to play a game that's exactly like an Aliens movie, you will never find a better game that can make it feel exactly like an Aliens movie. That everything about it is perfect for that. But that's really all it does. And if you want to have a game where you can have a lot more versatility, that's not it. It's so focused. And I think one of the things that made D&D so good was you can drop in lots of settings, or we can have lots of themes, and we can focus on lots of areas. And then, Call of Cthulhu, a lot of people always think it's like 1920s. And it's like any time period. And I focus more on the investigation than the horror. But we've done it in spaceships, we've done it in medieval times, you've done it in everything in between. So there is a lot more diversity that's possible with the allows to go. Traveler is a whole freaking universe. I can do any sci-fi I can imagine using Traveler without even having to house rule it. So that versatility is one of the things I love in games. And if I was going to design one, like a micro RPG is kind of like that. This is a game that's designed, you are playing a group of cops in LA chasing replicants, and that's literally all you can do with it, or it breaks. So,
well, it's funny.
I like broad games.
I've seen some stats though that just as you were mentioning, game collecting and never bringing them to the table, and how many times do you actually get a game to the table? So if you buy a game that it's got a very specific element to it, that that's the experience that you're going to get, maybe that's okay. Maybe you only play it 2 or 3 times anyways, and maybe it's wishful thinking that is going to become the next D&D where people break it out on a regular basis.
Oh no, and there are games that are like that I've picked up and will very rarely ever get pulled out. Bluebeard's Bride, I absolutely love that game. That is nothing I could ever do regularly. That is a very niche, very specific game, but gorgeous. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
No.
Stunningly beautiful, horrifically dark game. And so there are a lot. Right now I'm looking over at a copy of Cyborg, which is their sci-fi report, and whatnot. And it's there are those niches, and there's Mothership and a lot of others. I don't know. I like, if I'm going to start a campaign, I want to feel like well, there's a lot more we could do with this, whether we ever do it or not. Versus, I just want to grab this and do like a one or a two shot, then move on. Because I like to, whenever we do end a campaign, we do a short burst of a completely different genre, completely different game as a palate cleanse before we start the next campaign. And the next one could be the same type of game we were doing before. Like we might like, okay, now is a new Call of Cthulhu event game, or now a new Traveler game or whatnot. But in that meantime, it is kind of like something crazy we're going to try, which last time we did Righteous Blood, Ruthless Blades. We played that for, well, you played it longer than I thought we would. We played it for about 6 months because they absolutely loved it. And it's also a very hyper specific, it's very ancient Chinese wuxia. And it nailed the head. It nailed it. We loved it. It was great. And I was like, okay, we've done this, and then let's go on to the next thing. So that's actually really where I save those games for, is the spaces between campaigns, as the let's try something different. That's a short-term commitment versus this long epic campaign where we really get into the journey of our characters and whatnot. It's like, this is going to be like 3 adventures long, and then it's over. And it's like agreed upon up front. Like I'll tell them, like, guys, you don't need to buy the books because we're not going to be playing it that long. And then of course they get excited and they buy the books, and the 3 adventures are over, and I'm looking at them going, why? I was honest with you the whole time.
Yeah, that's the way it goes. I do love a 3-shot. That's why, like, more and more I love a 3-shot. That's just like the perfect kind of, like, I could go 3-shot for the rest of my life. I just love that.
Oh, well, because with like a little 1-shot game, it's like by the time it's over, you finally figured out, it's like, this is how I play this, and then it's over. It's like, well, dang. So then there's like the second one where you're like, yeah. And there's the third where you're like, I am a master of this. I know how to do all this stuff, and everything's moving because everybody's like clicked with it, and then it's done, because really that's actually all it had.
Yeah.
Versus you keep trying to do it and that shine fades. I think like a 3-shot's kind of perfect for like, get in there and everyone's like, oh, it's the greatest thing ever. It's like, cool. Well, let's put that away. Time for our next long epic campaign of something else. So no, I'm totally with you.
And as we kind of like wind down here, like you're not just content.
I'm getting warmed up, man.
You're not just content with your YouTube channel, and you're not content with all your writing. You also are a co-host of a podcast. Tell us, like, when do you find the time to throw that into the mix?
Right now, I have no idea. Actually, we've been having scheduling issues. So with that, my podcast partner, John Hook, who's actually been doing podcasting for a decade, he was one of the founders of the, oh my God, my brain is blanking right now, the Miskatonic University podcast. And he kind of was just kind of done with that one because it's been 10 years. And they have a 2 or 3 time a month schedule. And he's like, I want one that's just 1 time a month. And I don't want to be married to like kind of this format anymore. So he reached out to me. He's like, I want to do it 1 time a month, and it's mostly just going to be us BSing. Like that's pretty much it. And we'll have some ideas for game reviews or just kind of philosophy on gaming, kind of the stuff like I do with the channel, but more with a investigative horror slant, a lot of Call of Cthulhu slant to it. And I had been asked to do countless podcasts before that, and I always turned it down because it was always and we'll record it and you can edit it. I'm like, you have no idea what that actually entails. You're asking me to do a full-time job right there. And he came in and said, we're going to have an editor. And I was like, oh, so you're experienced, you know what you're doing, and you're not going to try to casually dump the elephant load of hard work on me and think that that's cool. So we started doing that. I think we're at 2 years now, and that's pretty fun. We just kind of BS and talk about stuff. I really enjoy the fact that he also wants to do it kind of more of an evergreen thing instead of like, what's coming out this week, and more of like, let's talk about this approach or this specific, monster or whatnot. And that's fun. But yeah, scheduling, it has been,
Yeah.
I've got so many irons in the fire right now. Like, John, I don't know when we're going to get together.
And I guess just at the very end now, reflecting upon your time playing games your whole life and the state of the hobby, all that time, I remember, like, I mean, it wasn't as popular as it is now, 6, 7 years ago. And it's hugely popular, at least 5e and the zeitgeist of, like, Stranger Things and that kind of stuff. And your channel growth kind of coinciding along with that. Reflecting upon your channel, the hobby, like, where do you think we're at and where do you think we're heading?
Oh, well, if I could answer that fully, I'd be a rich man. But where I kind of see it going, and a lot of it is based off the historical thing. If you talk with the Shannon, I would love to hear his views on it, because a lot of mine were kind of really cemented by reading his stuff. I feel that the hobby has at least broken mainstream enough that when it hits the inevitable wane, and Stranger Things ends and whatnot, um, it's still going to maintain some solid strength to it. It's not going to be like those dark days where, like, all of a sudden, like, there was no one gamed. And I also feel that with 5e has been around for a while. D&D is the gateway drug. The vast majority of us started with that. But it's already started showing a lot more popularity in alternatives to that, because you came in, you played it, you did a little bit, and all of a sudden somebody points out a different game that's actually much more your style, and people flip to that. So the whole industry has improved with 5e's success. So I think that will help maintain those other games pretty well for a while. We also have, I guess, like Matt Mercer and company are kind of branching off into, like, their own games and whatnot. Once you throw in the current events of the OGL debacle and a lot of the blowback on that, I've seen a lot more of the YouTube creators diversify. So I think that when the market does slow, I think it is actually going to stay pretty strong with other game companies versus just the one big dog. And hopefully that can, keep everything fun and interesting, and keep a lot of these game companies around for the next time there is that popularity surge, which is like, once every 10 years or so. The 5e one has been, like, bizarre because it's lasted so long.
Yeah, it's been a good run for them.
Oh, it's been amazing. But man, it's, anyone that doesn't think it's going to come to an end is like, oh, no, don't open up a history of the industry book, or maybe talk to any of the actual old dog, creators, those that are still alive, and they'll nod and be like, enjoy it while it lasts.
Yeah, it ebbs and flows, and there's some lean times in there. I know. But Seth, I just want to say, thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate you taking the time and sharing some of your history and some of the stuff that you've worked on. And I know personally, you have one of my favorite channels out there. I just love getting the notification that a new episode is up. So I just want to thank you from a lot of other fans out there as well.
Oh, well, thank you. That means a lot. But yes, I'm just a dork with a camera is pretty much how I just explain it. Like, thanks. For me though, like, my personal heroes are people like Mike Pondsmith and Greg Stafford and all of them who, they created these worlds for us to play in and have fun with, and all of that. Like, to me, those are the heroes versus, YouTubers talking about it. Like, man, I don't have that, whatever it is that they have, just that creative genius. So I consider them my actual, like, they're the rock stars. I'm just the announcer.
Well, I look forward to seeing much more from you in the future. And once again, thank you for coming on the show.
No, thank you for having me. This is fun.